This is different because now you have to prepare for this other exam which none of your other peers are doing.
So how important is the SAT score? How important are the essays? How important are the 10, 12 or academic scores?
So you can think of the SAT score as some sort of cutoff.
So I think 50,000 applications come to Harvard every year.
Nobody really knows exactly what worked for them, but I'll tell you I have a hint.
Even for a master's degree, if somebody wants to come back to India or eventually get into family business, do a startup of his or her own, or get into a job, is the ROI good enough?
I think that's a tricky question.
Welcome viewers to an extremely exciting episode of Think Tank with Aman. Today we are going to talk about everything abroad, from getting admissions to scholarships, from opportunities and placements to surviving in a foreign land, and much more. And we couldn't have asked for a better guest than him. He has dreamt of studying from an institution where Tier 2 and Tier 3 students not even dream of, but he has also cracked the code. Yes, he has studied from one of the best colleges across the country and across the world, or should I say, the best college in the world, Harvard. Yes, my friends, let's welcome Master Vaibhav Berlia to the show, a close friend, a younger brother, and a person whom all aspiring abroad students look up to. Welcome, Vaibhav.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Excited
Is this
for
your first podcast?
This is my first podcast. I did a short interview a couple times here and there, but I've never been to an actual podcast, so I'm pretty excited for this one.
So let's hope for the best. So yeah, let's get straight to the point. So I think Siliguri, यहाँ से कोई foreign जाने का ही नहीं सोचता है. Harvard तो बहुत दूर की बात है. So where did this entire idea come up from?
So this is actually taking me very long back, but we were both in school together. We were both in Don Bosco, and Aman was just 1 year older than me. And you will attest to this. When we were in school, there wasn't this culture of going abroad at all. 100%. Everyone who was 3-4 years older than us, who had just graduated high school and they had gone to college, the biggest target was Delhi University. That was number one, and maybe SRCC was the big one. And my dad had studied from SRCC. So mere liye, there was sort of this personal touch to it that I wanted to go to SRCC very badly. And I remember when I was in 9th or 10th grade, and every year SRCC's cutoffs were a topic of discussion. Ki is saal kitna cutoff aaya? And I remember one of those years, the cutoff was like 99 or 100%, something like that. I remember very clearly. And I just kept thinking, there is no way I can make it to SRCC. If the cutoff is 99 or 100%, it's not happening. And coincidentally, that year, 9th grade, when I was in 9th or 10th grade, I was on a family trip, vacation trip to the UK. So we visited Cambridge University, summer vacations. And I was very enchanted because it was so beautiful. The entire college campus, it just felt surreal. And for me, mere liye ek wo ho gaya ki what it must feel like to be a student here. And we never really imagined ki going to Cambridge University, that wasn't even an option. It was like SRCC is the best. Varna you have other colleges in DU, and then there's options in Kolkata and Bangalore and Bombay, and that's it. So I came back and I started thinking more and more, and the more I was like, I can't get into SRCC, but maybe there's options abroad that I can get into. So I started looking up places, and I started digging deeper and deeper into it. And that's the first time I heard the name Harvard. Up until 9th grade, I didn't even know Harvard existed. So I found out about Harvard. I found out more and more as I researched. I learned more about the American education system and Oxford, Cambridge in the UK. And there's also a bunch of other colleges in Australia and elsewhere in Europe. And tab se fir ek man mein my goal changed from I want to make it to SRCC. It changed to I want to make it to Harvard. Was
the ultimate.
It was the ultimate, but I didn't really believe I could do it. But at the end of the day, it was like that one thing you really, really want. So it worked out. But that's where I first where it started from.
Very, very interesting story. I think that travel changed the entire game for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But see, for a student in Siliguri, I think it's good to imagine. But like, there isn't available any resource available in the entire city. I think there are some, but not good enough. So for a average student who wants to study abroad, either for a master's or for a bachelor's, what are the various steps, right? From think application to counseling to an exam. What does the entire process look like?
So I applied for undergrad, so I can speak in depth about undergrad. I think the master's process is similar, but definitely a little
A little
different.
different, yeah.
So just about my experience, for me, as you said, we didn't have any resources, or I didn't have any resources back then. So I started off just by going on the internet and reading up about what are the different colleges that are available elsewhere and how does it work, because India my education system works very differently. You apply to a particular course program, and for example you apply for bachelor's of economics and you get into an economics program. In the US you just apply to a college, but you do like choose a sort of degree program while applying, but often you don't have to choose a program while you apply, and you only select your program once you get there. So especially for liberal arts colleges, which for me, like Harvard is a liberal arts college. So I only had to choose my program in my second year. But anyway, that's besides the point. The process is, I think it's easier to break it down into different countries because the US is the most complicated. So for the US for undergrad, you need a whole bunch of things. They will ask for your school scores right from ninth grade all the way to 12th grade. They will ask for your 10th board exam marks. They will also ask for predicted class 12 board exam marks because the application cycle is over before the board exam results are out. They will ask for letters of recommendation. So, two letters of recommendation from your school's teachers and one from your school counselor. If your school doesn't have a designated counselor, then your principal serves as the counselor. So, I got a letter from the principal. They will also ask for SAT or ACD scores. So, SAT and ACD are the two standardized tests which are used for undergrad education, undergrad admission in the US. And this, I think, is a big make or break factor because so SAT is on a scale of 0 to 1600 and ACT is on a scale of 0 to 36. They are supplementary, so in the sense that you just need to take one of those. I took the SAT, but it's pretty much you can take either, and they're very similar format. It's basically English and math, and that's one big challenge, I think, because we're not used to the sort of English questions that they ask on the SAT and ACT. So preparing for that is, I think, a big step. Other than that, like all the other stuff, board exam results, class 9 to 12 marks, getting good recommendation letters from your teachers is just stuff you're already doing as a good student in school, right? This is different because now you have to prepare for this other exam, which none of your other peers are doing. And the specialized coachings, I didn't really take coaching, but there's a lot of online resources available, websites. My Khan Academy is a big one for SAT. They provide free SAT prep. There's also a bunch of other free SAT coaching online. You can also take in-person coaching. And the SAT places you in comparison with students across the world because it's a benchmark, right? It's a standard test. Everyone across the world is taking the same test. It happens multiple times a year. You can take it more than once. You can take it as many times as you want. That I think is a big factor. So in order to get into a good college on the SAT, you want above 1400 out of 1600. In order to get into a really good college, ideally above 1500. And it doesn't exactly matter where you end up between 1500 and 1600 as long as you're above 1500. Other than that, they look at a lot at your overall profile. So the point I'm trying to get across is they will consider your extracurriculars and they will consider what kind of activities and leadership positions and social service and all that you've been involved in. But the big misconception for a lot of students is that I just need to do a lot of stuff. It's not that you need to do 10 different things. So if you're suppose an academic, right? In high school, there's someone who's a sportsman, someone who's an academic. And if you just go and play one, I don't know, like intra-school football tournament or even an inter-school football tournament, that one tournament isn't going to boost your chances by that much. what you should focus on is to try to get a story across. You need to have a story. What am I interested in? These are the 2 or 3 different extracurriculars that I'm very interested in. And I've been pursuing not just for like 6 months, but I've been doing these since I
Over the
was in
years.
ninth grade, over the years, yeah. So for me, debate was one of them, MUN was one of them, public speaking. I was also very involved in my schools. You were also we were working on this together, our schools, student government, student council, organizing a lot of fests, Bosco Fest, Emprendedore, all of that stuff. So there needs to be some story. And this, I would say, is most of what you need for the US. Although putting it together becomes an issue, also because you need to convey a lot of this through essays. So when you apply to the US, you apply through the Common Application, which is a portal, and you can apply to almost every single college through the Common App. And there's a 650 word Common App essay. So it's one essay that goes to all colleges, and then every college has their own supplementary essays. Some of them might have 2 essays, some of them might have 3 essays, some of them might not have any essays. So each college will ask you something. It might be like, tell us about a time when you failed, or tell us about a time when you learned something new, something like that, something that gets you to reflect on and share your experience. So that whole process is very lengthy, which is why a lot of people prefer hiring a counselor, career counselors. It's become more and more of a trend recently. I also had a career counselor, one from Kolkata. She was very helpful. And especially for someone from Siliguri, someone from a tier 3 city who didn't have a lot of other people who I could ask questions to. I think that was very helpful. But all of this only applies to the US. If you apply to Canada or if you apply to the UK, it's much simpler. In the UK, you just need one 500-word essay. That's it. Nothing else. So similar story in Canada.
So how important is each element? So you mentioned a lot of elements in the entire process.
Yeah.
So if we assign some kind of a weight from 100%, so how important is the SAT score? How important are the essays? How important are the 10, 12, your or academic scores, your extracurriculars?
I would say, think about it this way. Like in India, there's an academic, like a percentage cutoff, right? You try to apply for a college, there's a percentage cutoff for DU, and you can only get in if you meet that cutoff, right? So you can think of the SAT score as some sort of cutoff. But the difference is that here the cutoff is much more lax, it's much more wide. So for example, if in order to get into SRCC, the cutoff is 98 or 99%, and if you get 97%, you're out. You can't get in. For getting into a good Ivy League school or like Harvard or anything like that, there's no fixed cutoff. Like you don't have to get 1550 or 16 or 1590 or 1600. But you probably need to be in the range of 1500 plus. They will still consider you if you are, say, 1400, but then you have to really compensate for it on
And
the other
something
parts of
else.
your application. But yeah, so I think getting a good SAT score is definitely the first step. Because for them, that is the one thing that they can use to compare you with another kid who's applying from Idaho in the US, right? Like your high schools are completely different, your backgrounds are completely different. The kind of extracurricular opportunities you have access to are completely different. So it's very hard to compare people across the world. But that one score sort of, and also
Generalizes
research,
everybody.
exactly. And research has shown that SAT scores are a very good predictor of your performance in college going ahead. So they rely on that a lot. So I think your first focus should definitely be on getting a good SAT or ACT. You got to take one of those score. But that gets your foot in the door. After that, it's all about telling your story. So your extracurriculars and your recommendation letters should all sort of build up to that one story. Like, what am I trying to do? What's my story? Where do I come from? What do I want to do in life? What am I interested in? You have to somehow condense all of that and express it through your essays. So that's the tricky part. But it's hard to say that one thing is really the most important.
So I think what was your story? So I think 50,000 applications come to Harvard every year. I think
50,000, yeah.
yeah, approximate, and there is like 2 to 3% acceptance rate.
Yeah.
So like India से तो I think 50 से 100 लोग होंगे maximum. वो भी
India, say each year we have about 7 or 8.
students
That's it.
only.
Yeah.
So, what was your story and what made you land at Harvard?
See, the thing is, nobody really knows exactly what worked for them, but I'll tell you, I have a hint. For me, the story that my story, entire story, which worked for me at other schools as well, was that I was very passionate about education. And as I was telling you about the whole, how it's so hard to get into SRCC and DU, it felt like there was a sincere sort of lack of good educational opportunities. And I wanted to expand access to education. So even when I was in 11th grade in Don Bosco, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, I was really like researching a lot about other options available, other educational opportunities available elsewhere, and trying to expand access to that, not just for myself, but my friends as well. A lot of my friends were around me. I was trying to get them to apply, trying to get them to learn about this. There was this counselor at our school, part-time counselor, who I worked a lot with. We tried to organize some sort of talk shows as well. And my whole story was about this struggle about changing the mindset that you can do something bigger, that you can go beyond Delhi, that you can go beyond Bombay. And that's what I wrote my application essay on, about my whole experience of doing that. And the super interesting thing that happened was, so for most colleges, they won't interview you. So for Harvard, they usually interview you. I got an interview from the director of admissions. So I was a little surprised, why does the director want to interview me? Because I was in touch with some of the people, and usually it's like one of the people on the admissions committee. It's not the director. And so I hop on this interview, and she's 60 years old. And this woman, she tells me, her name is Robin. So Robin tells me that she actually had a very similar story to mine. She was from a very small town in the US, and nobody in her town knew about Harvard or like big Ivy League schools or anything like that. People just went to the local community college. And she was very gifted academically. She was a very smart student, but she never thought she had access to those opportunities. And she was never going to apply to Harvard. The reason she applied is because she used to babysit someone's kids, and they forced her to apply. They were like, "We will pay your fees. You should apply. Your application fee, you should apply." And she applied and she got in, and now she was working at Harvard 60 years later. And the other crazy part was that she had actually been to Siliguri like 30 years ago, when Siliguri was much, much smaller. So for her, 30 years ago, Siliguri was
Nothing.
nothing. Siliguri was absolutely nothing. And so her image of Siliguri was literally like a small village in India. And she talks to me and she's like, I never thought I would actually have I would read an application from
From
Siliguri.
Siliguri.
So we connected over that. I think that was one thing that really clicked for me. Um, but nobody applies to Harvard or any of these big schools thinking they're going to get in. You should apply, hope for the best, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of luck as well. So I was lucky to get in.
That's amazing. I think it's a very, very rare and unique story to hear. But now let's flip the question. So now, what's the major difference? So if you can put it down in an elevator pitch format, 4 to 5 pointers why students should study in foreign universities versus an Indian university. So just
Right.
in a fun fact manner, we can have an elevator pitch of around 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Quick pointers. One, I think the education system in the US is very different. And I keep emphasizing the US. UK might be different. The US, they emphasize academic freedom and flexibility. So I graduated with an economics degree, but I've taken classes in psychology, in real estate, in social studies, in sociology, in political science. I did a secondary in political science. And so you have the freedom to explore a lot of different subjects. And you can often, if you choose a liberal arts college, or most colleges, they provide the flexibility to decide what you really like. Because when I was in high school, I was like, I don't know if I want to do a BCom or economics or accounts or whatever. Matlab, I can't decide right now. I don't have enough information. So that I think is a big
Plus.
advantage. just allowing yourself those options to explore all these different disciplines, and maybe you'll probably like something new. The second thing is that the exposure is very different. What I mean by that is key, talk to your friend who never went out of Siliguri. A lot of our friends who stayed in Siliguri for college. Talk to your friends who went to Delhi or Bombay for college. And I have a lot of friends from the US, and I can clearly see the difference in sort of their experience and mindset. And not to put anyone down, but what I'm trying to say is that the more exposure you get, the more sort of wide your worldview becomes.
Definitely.
Because you get to experience newer things, you get to meet people from way more different backgrounds. If you're in Siliguri, you only meet people from Siliguri. If you're in Delhi, you meet people from pretty much all over the country.
Country, yeah.
If you're in the US, you're meeting people from all over the world. And there were a lot of things which I had taken as given when I went to the US. It's like the sort of things that you just grow up with, almost superstitions. And I don't mean it in a religious way, but more like there are certain things you just assume are true. And you don't realize there are these superstitions until you go outside and meet people and you realize they have a very different worldview. So that exposure, I think, is very valuable, not just in terms of challenging your perspectives and your worldview, but also in terms of just learning how the world works. You get to see a lot of new things, right? For example, if you're interested in doing a startup, you go to the US and you see people working on whole lots of new ideas which don't even exist in India. So that, I think, is a big factor. Um, I think those are the big two for me. There's also a bunch of other things, but I'll keep it to 2 minutes.
So now let's turn the tables. Why not abroad? Like, why not foreign education? There's a lot of talk about struggles living outside India. I think that is definitely one of them. But
Yeah.
why not abroad education?
I think the biggest factor is cost. I think that's a big one. So I was very lucky to get a scholarship, and that made a massive difference. But I know a lot of people who go to the US for an undergrad, and an undergrad education in the US is expensive for Americans. So for someone from India,
Yeah.
it feels way more expensive. So if you go to a private school, private college in the US, your yearly cost would probably be around $80,000, maybe more. So 70, 80, $90,000 a year, that's what, 60, 70 lakhs
70 lakhs
a year. And it's a 4-year program. So at the end of the day, education is an investment, right? It's a huge investment in yourself. That's a time investment, effort investment, but it's a huge monetary investment.
But the question is it worth the investment?
That's what I was going to say. So I don't know if 80 or $90,000 a year is honestly worth it for a lot of people and for a lot of schools. So sure, if you get into Harvard or if you get into Wharton or Yale or not even those, but you get into some of the best schools outside, I think that education is worth it, even if it feels like a lot today. Even if you have to take out a bank loan, you will pay it off, guaranteed. But if you have to go to a much more mediocre school, I don't think it makes sense to spend that much money. The other thing, obviously, is that if you're going to the US for an education, especially if you're going for an undergrad when you're still 18, you really sort of assimilate in that environment. And so, if ultimately you want to stay in India, I think the returns to that education are slightly lower.
That's
And
where I was coming to eventually, but yeah.
yeah, I think people might disagree. I personally still think there's a lot of value in studying abroad. But at the same time, just from a more practical viewpoint, right? Spending 4 years abroad, you get used, and especially at that age of 18 to 22, you get very used to the lifestyle abroad. You get very used to the mindset there. You change a lot, and often it's harder for you to come back after that. And if you do come back, you don't often get the full value of that degree. Especially if you, for example, come back either to get into your family business or even if you start a job in India. having invested that much time and money in a degree abroad and then coming back to India,
The returns not.
the returns are not as much. So if ultimately, I think if you ultimately want to live in India, it makes more sense, in my opinion, to do your undergrad in India and then go abroad for a 1 year master's program. Because a 1 year master's program is much cheaper and you still get a good amount of exposure. You're also much more mature by then. But this is my personal opinion.
So I think only cost is the major drawback. Anything else apart from that?
I think that is the big one because the quality of education is usually much better. At least from what I've discussed with my friends who went to colleges in India. The one other disadvantage I would say is that if you study in India and again you want to live in India, you make a network of people who are also going to be in India. My entire group of friends is now in the US. So if I want to come back here in 2 years from now, I'm going to lose touch with all of them. So that I think makes a big difference. But otherwise, from what I've seen, I think the campus life, the quality of education, the overall opportunities available outside are definitely better.
But nowadays, a lot of students have been fancying studying abroad. Like, as you mentioned, Harvard, Wharton, these are a different league schools altogether. But if we talk about something, I don't want to demean any colleges, but a kind of
Right.
a tier 2 B school or a tier 2 undergrad school, in that sense, even for a master's degree, if somebody wants to come back to India or eventually get into family business, do a startup of his or her own, or get into a job, is the ROI good enough?
I think that's a tricky question. I think it really depends on a sort of case to case basis. It really depends how much money you're willing to put forward and how much you think you're going to get out of it. How much, it also comes down to how much you can actually make out of it. Because a lot of people I know from tier one cities in India, it's very common for them to go abroad, even if they get into a very, I would say something like a tier, like a, whatever, like a tier 3B school or a tier 3 masters or an undergrad. And a lot of them, they go abroad and they just sort of stick around in their same friend group from India. They only hang out with Indians. They only sort of, they don't really expose themselves up to the opportunities available. They don't make the most of it. This is a bit of a generalization, but I've seen a lot of people do that. And I don't think it's worth it if you just go on a sort of a vacation with your friends for a year. Like, I think it's a waste of time and money. But even if you go to a not so good college, I still think there's a lot of value there that you can extract. So if you can afford it, there's definitely that if, because even a 1 year master's program will definitely cost you at least 30 lakhs,
30, yeah, minimum.
probably more if you want to live it better. So I think that amount is huge for a lot of people. For someone from Bombay, from a upper middle class family, that amount might not be as much. So it depends on your situation and it depends on how much you can make out of that experience.
But let's compare an average person who has completed his undergrad or postgrad. Let's take both examples for say a person who has completed his undergrad from the US, worked there for 2 years. Is the salary, and he or she is planning to take up a job back in India, maybe because of whatever reasons. So, what is the difference in terms of salary?
I think the difference is pretty massive. I mean, again, it's hard to get into numbers because of how wide the range is. So even within the US, someone graduating from a tier 3 undergrad versus someone graduating from a tier 1 undergrad might have a huge difference in salary. But at least from my experience, from what I have seen with my friends in the US and with my friends back home in India, I think the number of opportunities of better salary available in the US are just bigger. What I mean by that is that if you have the potential, the same person will definitely land a much higher salary in the US. So I do think that if your ultimate goal is to just take up a nice, stable job and have a stable income and live your life, I think US is the better place to be. Because I think the salaries in India are way lower. That's just because think about it, right? There's way more manpower available in India. There's way more labor. So labor wages are definitely going to be lower. But on the same point, I think if you flip the question, it's about if you want to start a business, if you want to start a startup, I think India is a great place to be. Bangalore is an amazing place to be. But I know people, engineers in Bangalore, who are just earning 4 lakhs a year, 4 or 5 lakhs a year,
Definitely, yeah.
which is way lower than what an engineer could make in the US, even if he doesn't get into a great company, even if he's at a whatever company. So that salary difference is massive.
But there's a lot of talk today, like I think big entrepreneurs, big nation builders, kind of a recession period. So in this era, what is your thought about all this?
I fully agree with that, and which is why I want to come back to India, and I will be back within a few years, hopefully sooner. But the question you asked me before was about someone, just an average person. The kind of opportunities someone in an average situation has access to is restricted. So I'm talking about a person who does not have access to a family business, has to start their own business, who does not already have sort of a good sort of cushion to fall back on. And they have to make it their own. They graduated from an average or like a sort of an average college. In that case, it is much harder to break your way up in India and to have a comfortable lifestyle. If you're among the sort of higher percentiles in India, if you have access to a family business, and let's be real, right? A lot of people in our circles, a lot of people we know, including ourselves, are sort of in that upper quartile or even higher. But you have to think about this huge mass of Indians. 800 million people in India are still receiving free grain from the government, right? So there's a lot of people who want to make it big in life who are just restricted in terms of resources. So if you're really restricted in terms of resources and you just want to get that ticket out of poverty or ticket out of the lower middle class, a good job in the US is your ticket out. It's hard. It's hard to get a good job in the US, but if you can get it, it's your ticket out. It's going to be much harder to get to, like social mobility is lower in India. It's going to be much harder to get into a good position in India. But if you already have access to resources, I think you can really use them over the next 20 years in India while the market is expanding, while there's a lot of growth to, I think, do something very, very different.
But taking in case today's point of view, wherein I have heard multiple students, even some of my friends who have gone abroad, came back to India not because they wanted to come back to India, but because they couldn't find a decent enough job or they couldn't.
Right.
So how do we address this problem of people coming back to India after paying such a
Right.
hefty amount there?
No, that's true, but I think that is more of a issue right now, because over the last 2 years, the job market in the US has been really bad, especially post COVID, with the super high inflation. There has been a sort of setback in hiring, and the big tech bubble has burst. So Facebook stock was as low as $100 at one point, right? So all these big tech companies fired a lot of people. I'm in finance. A lot of finance companies also stopped hiring or fired a lot of people. So the job market is really bad right now. I know a lot of friends and other people who are finding it very difficult to get a good job. But I think that's more of a temporary situation. The US economy is already recovering very fast. If you just look at the growth rate, the number of jobs that are created every month, the data is looking great. So the job market is bad right now, but I think it will recover soon. I don't think we saw this trend 5 years ago. It's more of a trend right now. I'm still, not to hide the fact, it is still hard to get a job in the US. Undisputed, like especially as an international. Because a lot of companies, they just don't want to hire international students. But assuming a normal job market, it's not too bad. Like you can definitely get a good job, even if you graduate from an average school.
So let's go to the final question. Let's compare the life outside India and within India. So there's lack of family presence, not enough friends. So how do you compare for a sustainable life outside India? Is it really sustainable in the longer run, maybe for a person who wants to stay there throughout his life? Or is it only sustainable for a few years and then eventually the home country is the place to be?
That's a tough question. Um, the first point, lack of family, is a very, very big factor. My entire family is here in Siliguri. I have no family in the US, not even any cousins. And it can get a little isolating in that sense, especially when it's Diwali and you have a couple friends who are around you, but you don't have family to celebrate it with. I haven't been home for Diwali in 4 years, and it's tough. It gets tough at times, but other than that, I think you will make friends if you are more comfortable around people from home. There's going to be a lot of people from home. The US has a lot of Indians who are also looking for friends, and you can find your own home. So for Holi, we used to do a little Holi celebration every year in college, and it's not exactly like home, but it's good enough. But it is hard because at the end of the day, life in the US is very individualistic. You stay in a small apartment, you go to your job, you come back, and that's it. Like in India, it's much easier for you to go and meet people at the chai adda or just meet people in the evenings. Stuff like that. Like it's way easier to make those connections and have more time to friends and more time to family. But I don't think it's impossible to adjust. I think it's if you have it in you, life is going to be tough. It's going to be tough for the first few years for sure, but you will find your community and you will make a home.
I think that is more of an individualistic and a subjective opinion to say. Matlab, it depends really on the person. If you want people all the time, I think India is the place to be. But if you
Yeah.
are fine in your own company, then you might try. But the last thing, I was just reading a stat yesterday only. One out of three people in the US are facing loneliness. So that is the challenge that is coming up, and there are a lot of people not from the US in the US. So that is the major challenge that is coming up. So
That's true.
that is something that needs to be addressed. But thank you, viewers, for watching this show. Stay tuned for the next episode.